In today's world, people feel lost in a sea of ideas. Which ones should we accept? Stay tuned because you're listening to Veracity Hill, striving for truth on faith, politics, and society. Here is your host, Kurt Jarris.
Well, a good day to you, and thanks for joining us here for another episode of Veracity Hill, where we are striving for truth on faith, politics, and society. Very nice to be with you here. This is episode 199. We are a week away from our final episode, and final has a asterisk next to it, as in we're taking an indefinite hiatus. That's what we're calling it for the program. And it has been such a pleasure to come to you for 3 3/4 years, bringing new content to you every Saturday. It's been such a great opportunity. And for our last 2 episodes, we have 2 tremendous guests. And on today's episode, we're going to be talking about the New Testament, in some ways a big picture, but also a thorough analysis and understanding of the theology, but not just the theology, the Bible backgrounds, the historical setting, the literature that is the New Testament. Sometimes when we think about how we read the Bible, we can do so rigidly or take it piecemeal, verse here and a verse there, and sometimes we forget the big picture or the historical context, the social setting that the text itself was written in. And it's very important for us to understand these things when we're studying the Bible, and we even want to understand how a pastor may be delivering a sermon, or what the author means when the author writes something. Considering these various factors is so important to understanding what the text itself means. And so on last week's episode, we looked at, was that last week or no, 2 weeks episode, textual criticism. And that's related a little bit to what we're doing here on today's episode, but we're also taking a step back and looking at other aspects of New Testament hermeneutics. So to help us along in our study and our understanding, we have invited a man from the future. Yes, indeed, he is from the future. His name is Michael Bird, and he is the academic dean and lecturer in theology and New Testament at the Ridley College in Melbourne, Australia. He's the author of a number of great popular works in New Testament scholarship, and I also want to recommend this one that I thoroughly enjoyed, How God Became Jesus, which was sort of a response to Bart Ehrman's work, How Jesus Became God. Wonderful collection of essays there. But he is the co-author and editor of this behemoth work here, The New Testament in Its World. So by N.T. Wright, or Tom as his friends call him, and Michael Bird, An Introduction to the History, Literature, and Theology of the First Christians. And let me say, this book is awesome. This is something that every high school New Testament Bible teacher should be purchasing, and even freshman, sophomore level college university professors should be purchasing and requiring their students to purchase and using this as your textbook, because I've spent some time going through it, and it is full of great material, including some very fun images and pop culture references, which will make it a bit more exciting than one's maybe standard or traditional NT survey course. Dr. Bird, thank you so much for joining us on our program today.
Well, thank you very much, Kurt.
So you come to us from the future, and what's it like tomorrow?
Well, in Melbourne, Australia, it is bright and sunny with blue skies.
We've had to schedule this recording so that way you could be at least somewhat alert and awake. Our normal recording times wouldn't jive with that, but video chatting with you while you were sleeping, might be just as educational.
Well, I'm not that sharp at 2 a.m. in the morning, let me tell you.
Yes, but I'm glad nevertheless that we could finally get a chance to sit down with you and to have you enlighten to us not just your knowledge, your research, your wisdom, but also your keen sense of humor and pop culture. I've enjoyed reading your material and find it very down to earth and engaging. And so for me, this is a personal delight to have you on the program today.
Perfect to be here.
So let me ask you. So you're sitting at a lunch probably with Tom, and you're asking him, "Hey, we need to do a textbook together. What do you say?" Is that how this project got started?
Not quite, not quite. It was more like a British publisher, SPCK, and their editor, Phil Law, saying, "Do you have any book projects for us, Mike? You could do." And I said, "Well, I'm kind of booked up at the moment. But hey, you should. Let me give you a tip for one." I said, "Why don't you get someone to work with Tom Wright to turn his lifetime of work into a single volume, a New Testament introduction?" And when I said that, the eyes lit up. I thought, "Oh, that is a great idea. Yes, we should do that." It's like, "Hey, why don't you do it with him?" And I said, "Well," I just said, "I'm kind of busy, so it would take me for a while, and you'd need to wait for Tom to finish a couple of things he's working on anyway." But yeah, eventually they spoke to Tom about it, and Tom liked the idea. He said, "Oh yeah, I know that Mike Bird guy. He seems like a nice kid, as I was some 10 years ago or something." And yeah, and then I started working with the Wrightonian corpus to turn into an introduction. Around the same time, Zondervan came on board, and they deployed a full suite of resources to go with it, and it went from being a fairly standalone, somewhat black and white book to a bigger than Ben-Hur sort of magnum opus, which is it's kind of the Hagia Sophia of New Testament textbooks, if you ask me. It's beautiful, it's amazing, it's colourful, but boy is it big. And that's because so much has gone into it in terms of content, in terms of colour, maps, charts, images, artwork. So we've tried to make this both in terms of content, educational, but in terms of reading experience, something really to behold and enjoy as you read it.
Yes, and one of the things I appreciate, again, I sort of contrasted it. This is not exactly a typical New Testament survey textbook. This is a book which gets into the backgrounds, the historical setting, in a way that introduces the reader and brings them up to par fairly quickly on New Testament studies. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's very much it is. I think we do several things. On the one hand, we want to introduce people to the actual texts of the New Testament. Whether that's the Gospel of Luke or Romans or Hebrews or First Peter, you want people to know something about the texts, where they come from and what they're about. We also want to embed this with our understanding of the origins of Christianity. So it's New Testament within the story of the early church, within the context of Christian origins. And of course, we also want to change the way people actually read the New Testament. We don't just want them to go, a whole bunch of facts that they can download in their brain and file under R for arrivederci and maybe retrieve at some later point. We actually want to change the way people read the New Testament. We want to convince them that this is history, this is literature, this is theology.
Yes, this is, to me, it's so important because you're teaching students here to read the Bible literarily, because that's what it is. It is a collection. It's a book of literature, and that is so important to helping people to contrast that with reading the Bible literally, because then people, if they're reading it literally, they're imposing their preconceptions on what literally means and what the author meant, that they're really missing out on the poetic nature, the grandeur, the message of the story being told here, the heroes and the villains, the victory that's being communicated here in the new life that we can live presently now for. And it's not something that we just, we're not just passing through on this earth waiting for us to die. So there's that message is so important, and it all starts with understanding that the text itself is to be read literarily. So what was your thinking in regards to the structure of the textbook? I mean, I've got some other questions, but I've just really appreciated how it doesn't jump right in there with, let's look at Matthew, let's look at Mark.
Yeah.
Did you
Yes,
go? Did you go through a thought process with Tom and a brainstorm session, or is this something you sort of came up with on your own?
yeah, some people were a little bit vexed as why we didn't do this in a canonical order, like go Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Acts, Romans, and so forth. There's a couple of reasons for that. First of all, like I said, we want to embed the story of the New Testament within the story of early Christianity. And one of the things that, well, I mean, you'll certainly know, Kurt, is that Paul's letters were written before the Gospels. Most of the Gospels were probably written from about, well, most people think between about 70 to 90-ish, or, maybe a little bit of leeway. Maybe one was a bit earlier, maybe something was a bit later, but generally sort of around that spatial time. But between, Jesus' death and when the first Gospel is written, there are some 40 years going on. And that's when you got Paul writing his letters. That's where the early church is expanding. So we kind of wanted to tell the story of the early church, its context in the Jewish and the Greco-Roman world, about the historical Jesus, the resurrection, the ministry of Paul and his letters, and then you get to the Gospels. So, that's the reason why we did it in this way, because we're telling a historical story, not just kind of going on a tour of the canonical order.
Yes, very not just historical, but in a sense meta, because you guys are analyzing, you're seeing it from the way it happened, and so in that sense, it's more chronological than canonical. So, all right, the impetus for the book comes out of the attempt to curb people away from reading the New Testament a certain way. How is it that people are reading the New Testament today that you saw this need to say, hang on a second?
Well, I think people can tend to gravitate towards certain approaches. Some people want to read the New Testament purely in the context of, say, a systematic theology. So they've kind of got their system, and then the question is, where does the Bible get into that? Others want to read the Bible in terms of a biblical theology, which is, again, like systematic theology. Again, that's fine, but they have a very particular idea of what that means, both in theory and in practice. And then there's some people want to read the Bible just as a very crass and brutal history. And the problem is you can get all these things, the systematic theology, the biblical theology, the historical aspects tend to get very siloed away from each other. We've got to remember that the New Testament it is history. So we're very, very big on historical backgrounds, historical context. In fact, we're adamant, unless you know at least something of that historical context, you're going to get really, really confused and misguided. But again, there is an ongoing story here about God. That's why Tom Wright's big series is Christian Origins and the Question of God. There's a theological dimension which comes out in the sort of the biblical theology of each book, how it's part of the Christian story, which feeds into a Christian worldview, which is the very thing of systematic theology. So hopefully we're doing something that can be a little bit more organically related to those three areas of history, biblical theology, and systematic theology, rather than just trying to use the New Testament, if you like, as the meat for the sausage maker for any single one of those things. We think it needs to be a little bit more of a well-rounded diet, or have a few more applications than what people are ordinarily thinking about.
I am certainly supportive of the work of New Testament scholars. I have found that many times there are theologians, which I am myself one, but many times when theologians will really come in with their preconceptions of what the text is saying. And so the priority of good hermeneutical work, good biblical interpretation is so important to having a right view of one's theology. And as you mentioned, you get systematic theologies or biblical theologies, trying to understand the text from that vantage point first. And really that should be the outworking of what we understand the text to be saying to begin with. There are people that read the scripture, I think lay level here, who or young students of the scripture who are reading the New Testament, and they do it verse by verse, or in a sort of devotional way, and they miss the big picture of what's going on. They miss the big picture of the victory of the resurrection. Why are those themes important for you and Tom?
Well, it's a bit like, if you're just enjoying one verse at a time from the Psalms or from Romans or from, First John, you may get a few interesting details, but you're really going to end up just it's like going through a buffet and picking up a one little item from each salad. Like you pick up some sultanas from the salad, pick up some onions from this one, and it may seem like a good idea, but you're not enjoying each thing as a whole. Like in a Waldorf salad, you don't just pick out the walnuts. You enjoy the whole salad, or where it's a Caesar salad or a Greek salad, whatever it is. There's a sort of a nutritional value of having something whole, which is why, one of the best approaches to preaching is not just to preach one verse randomly week to week, but to actually work your way through a whole book. I mean, if you wouldn't preach just randomly picking verses every week out of your Bible, then you shouldn't be reading your Bible that way either. You should be reading and digesting and meditating and resting in whole books at a time, and understanding that book's contents and its context, and indeed for us its consequence, is what makes for healthy Bible reading, not this sort of kind of strange buffet that you just pick things up very smallly and very randomly.
Is that maybe why you think many evangelicals, or at the very least evangelicals in America, have missed out on, in some respects, the big picture?
Yeah. I mean, I think the big problem is we often want to treat the Bible as a source of life hacks, or something like, I need 12 biblical tax shelters. What have you got for me? Or can you give me 5 ways to be a more godly pet owner? Or, something. We often want the Bible to be a life hack. And so we want to find that one little verse that gives us that little tip of advice or encouragement. And, and that's why, you get people writing books like, I don't want to offend anyone by saying this, but books like The Daniel Diet. The book of Daniel is not written to help you lose weight. But one of the most successful books several years ago was Rick Warren's The Daniel Diet, which for me is endemic of how many people read the Bible, or use the Bible, might be better. It's a resource with some good life tips. And if you're using the Bible that way, the same way you might use a popular psychological magazine, or the latest book by Dr. Phil, or somewhere between Chopra and Oprah, you're going to have all sorts of problems coming out. The Bible does have a lot of practical stuff. Read Proverbs, read the Book of James, read the Sermon on the Mount. It's filled with practical advice, but it's not just a divine life hack that's been wired to you. And I think that is the biggest problem with our reading strategies. We want something there to give us a quick fix. And that's why the one verse a day can do that. We think, okay, here's a little bit of encouragement. Here's a little tidbit of advice to get me through, rather than, dealing with huge swaths of text like Isaiah 40 to 55, or something like Book 1 of the Psalms, or the first half of Mark's Gospel, or the first 5 chapters of Romans. We shouldn't be offering people the equivalent of, a French fry a day. We should be offering them a venerable biblical banquet of like 4 or 5 courses, where there is far more enjoyment and far more nutrition, if you ask me.
I mean, I did have 2 cheeseburgers, a fry, and a drink for lunch, which is better than 1 fry at a time.
Yeah. Two cheeseburgers? 2 cheeseburgers?
Yes. I mean, it's number 9 on the value meal,
Yeah. Did you have a Diet Coke with it? That's what I know. Did you have the Diet Coke as well?
No. I'm a big fan of Dr. Pepper. That is my beverage of choice.
Okay. I never understand Americans ordering 2 cheeseburgers and a Diet Coke. I thought, look, if you're having 2 cheeseburgers, then what's the point of the Diet Coke? I mean,
Yeah. Well, they've got to somehow make up a little bit for it.
uh,
But
yeah,
if you know Daryl Bach, he and I are kindred spirits that Dr. Pepper just runs through our blood. So
well, if you like basically carbonated cough syrup, that's the way I would describe Dr. Pepper.
Daryl and I may have to start a campaign or something to convince you to have a beverage or something and video record it. Maybe we'll come up with something.
Yeah.
Oh, funny. All right. So when we are thinking about how we can get students, lay level or just anyone interested in understanding the New Testament, how do we demonstrate to them that a good place to start is learning about backgrounds and Bible backgrounds? To me, at least, I think that's sort of one of the foundational places, because otherwise they come into the text with their own preconceptions, and you end up getting medieval readings of Paul, for example, and you don't read him as a Jew, you read him as a 16th century Protestant.
Yeah, and not everything in I would say in the Protestant Paul is necessarily wrong. But if that's the only well you're pulling water from, again, it's going to be a fairly narrow way. I mean, I tend to use two examples when I talk about historical background. The first one I use is the image of God. Often theologians have thought about the image of God as some sort of human quality or capacity that is generally universal. It can be like a capacity for relationships, capacity for rational discourse, or something along those lines. But that has always had these somewhat sinister implications that people with cognitive impairments, ranging from Down syndrome to dementia, are thereby diminished in the image of God. Even if you think it's with a relational capacity, it means people with some degree of autism or Asperger's themselves are less in the image of God if they're less relational. I mean, it even means introverts are less in the image of God if they're less kind of people orientated. But if you study the image of God in the ancient world, it's normally used as a name of regency or the title of a monarch who represents the local deity to the people. So, Tutankhamun was an image of one of the Egyptian deities. The Babylonian monarchs or Mesopotamian monarchs were images of the local deities. Or the Roman emperor could be the image of Jupiter or something like that. It was meant to be a specific thing. But what Genesis 1 does is it takes this thing of the kings being the image of God and it applies it to the whole human race. Every human being is in the image of God, not these elite few monarchs on the top of some kind of pyramid of power and privilege. It means all of humanity is royal, special, majestic in God's eyes. This idea of being in the image of God has been democratized. Mm-hmm. And that carries a whole range of implications that go with it, ranging from how we look, how we rule and reign over creation in a caring fashion, to how we treat other human beings. So again, if you understand the sort of ancient background of the image of God language, it has a far better series of implications and stops some bad theology. Like, you can't say things, okay, well, people born with certain cognitive abilities are not in the image of God because, they can't do maths or they can't tell an I from an it. So there's a whole bunch of implications. The other example I give of biblical background is when Jesus is given a coin, when Jesus is asked, rather, should we pay taxes to Caesar or not? This is not a question about the separation of church and state. They're not like really, we're really befuddled about this. Should good Jews pay taxes to Caesar? No, I mean, the question is, to quote Admiral Akbar, it's a trap. But you've got to know a little bit of background to see how the trap works. So here's the thing. Around the time of Jesus' birth, there was a rebellion in Galilee. And it was all about because of a census of taxation, and the revolutionaries at the time had a motto, no king but God. And if you pay taxes to Caesar, that means you're recognizing him as king. So taxes is not just kind of, bad, sucky economics. It's also treason and blasphemy. So if you pay taxes to Caesar, it's a betrayal of the nation. Of course, if you don't pay taxes to Caesar, or you oppose it, then you're throwing your lot in with the revolutionaries, and it also means you're acting seditiously. So when the Pharisees and Herodians ask him, should we pay taxes to Caesar or not, he's put in a kind of catch-22. If he says yes, then he looks like a traitor to the national cause. If he says no, then they can arrest him on the spot for sedition, which is exactly what they try to do at the trial. They try to point this out. Jesus splits the horns of the dilemma by bringing out a coin. And so, if you can imagine one of these coins, a Tiberian tribute penny, on the one side it's got a picture of Tiberius's mother, and it says I think Tiberius with her saying, high priest. But on the other side you have the image of Tiberius's bust saying, son of the divine Augustus. So in other words, it's a coin where he's called a son of God. And that's why Jesus says, whose image is on it? Now, what were the Jews like with graven images of deities and gods? Not particularly happy with it, not really into it. And basically when he says, give to Caesar what is Caesar, he's basically saying, give the pagan king back his pagan money. Or he may be even hinting at something even a little bit more subversive by saying, let's hope that Caesar gets everything he deserves. So again, if you know what a coin looks like, if you know about the history of Jewish revolutionary movements, you understand better how the argument works, or how the story works in the Gospels.
Yes, that is a wonderful example of how the background illuminates not just the meaning of the text itself, but Jesus' very teaching. And you see that, for me, I think my eyes were opened when I learned about in the book of Revelation when Jesus says, I'll vomit you out. And, youth pastors across the country say, Jesus either wants you to be hot or cold, so you're either for him or you're against him. And I was like, well, wait a second. No, Jesus wants everybody to be on his side. This is not for or against. Something else is going on here. Well, lo and behold, you learn about the backgrounds, the springs and the purposes they served.
Yeah.
And the aqueduct system would bring about lukewarm water, and because of the iron buildup, it would make people literally sick. And so this is the types of material that you just don't learn about in just giving a glean through of the scriptures if you don't study what the text means. And I feel a sneeze coming on now. How fortunate this is. You ever get one of those in an interview, Mike?
Not during the interview, but I am prone to these weird sneezing fits where I just can't stop sneezing for about 10 minutes, and I don't know why.
Oh, well, I hope that doesn't happen here. Okay, while this hopefully subsides, tell me about the early Christians and the perceptions that they had. You talked about many people today think the Bible's about a life hack. I mean, surely if people back then read Paul's letters, their life would just be made better on the spot, right?
Yeah, well, maybe in some cases they can be a little bit true. Like Paul's telling you, stop visiting prostitutes in Corinth. I can't help but think there might be a few immediate payoffs on that front, so that there are a few good life hacks there. But no, I think other things. So with the early church, you've got to remember you're dealing with a group of people. Let's start with the Jerusalem church, who are Jews, many from Galilee, who believed that they were with a leader who was a prophet, the Messiah indeed, and he'd just been crucified. And so all of their hopes and expectations had seemingly been turned into debris. Then they became convinced that he was alive. He had appeared to them. And now they're having to completely rethink the Jewish worldview, and they're thinking like which parts of the Bible, and for them the Bible's the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, which parts of the Bible illuminate for this? How do we explain this particular or special presence we have with us now? What do we think of God if Jesus is indeed ascended and indeed sitting at the right hand of the Father? What does that mean for Israel? What does it mean for the nations? What is our job in the world now in light of that? That's what the early church is thinking through. And, and 5 minutes after Pentecost, they don't have all the answers. They're still trying to figure out, who is Jesus? What does this all mean? And how does this apply? And this is why they've still got to go through all these issues. Like, do Gentiles join our movement? If so, do they convert as Jews or do they remain Gentiles? What about, women and veils? What about eating pagan food? What does that mean for, different, Judean groups like the Pharisees or the Herodians? That type of thing. They've got all these various issues they've got to work themselves through, and then think, what is their mission? What is their vocation in the world today? So that's the context in which I think we get these letters by Paul and others being written.
Very nice. Okay, we've got to take a break here. I'm just noticing the time, and when we come back, we'll continue talking about the grand picture, the grand message of the New Testament, and how we can understand it by having a right understanding of the books of the New Testament, even how it was formed, and the important hermeneutical principles that go into our studying of the New Testament. And my guest today is Michael F. Bird, and he is the co-author. Or Mike, do you go co-editor, co-author? What's the situation on this guy?
Well, I tend to go co-author. Co-author, yes. But it's very amusing to see the way you're struggling with the book. A colleague of mine, Brian Rosner, told me that this book is hard to put down, but even harder to pick up.
Yes, and it's a great textbook. Again, we will put a link at our website for people to purchase. Highly recommend this book and the workbook and associated DVD lecture series, also available on just audio for those that are interested. All right, stick with us through this short break from our sponsors.
You're listening to Veracity Hill, striving for truth on faith, politics, and society.
Evangelical Christians are talking about hell. What if we believe what we believe because we've always believed it? What if the gospel is really a matter of life and death? We want you to open your mind, open your Bible, and rethink hell. At rethinkinghell.com, evangelicals look at what the Bible says about hell, putting conventional and controversial views to the test.
Let's say there's this Christian apologist. You love their message, but have trouble finding their videos, their articles, or social media posts. How do you stay connected to them? We're on it. Defenders Media uses the tools of the digital age to create content for your favorite apologists. We give them more screen time, more digital soapboxes, and more presence to deliver more of the content that you love. That's what we do.
I know that social media is important to those of you who follow my work. Many respond to my videos and posts on Facebook and Twitter. But it becomes impossible after a while to keep up with it all and to continue with research. That's why I'm thrilled that we have found a solution, Defenders Media.
Whether it's a website, whether it's printed material, whether it's a question on graphics, I cannot do what I do and reach my audience without the help of Defenders Media. They have been integral in helping me to reach my audience.
Defenders Media ensures consistent content reaches your hand from today's leading apologists and apologetic ministries, like Mike Licona, Apologetics 315, the Veracity Hill Podcast with Kurt Jarris, and more.
To learn more, text the word Defenders to 555-888, and we'll send you a free PDF of the top 5 ways to share the gospel online. Thanks for sticking with us through that short break from our sponsors. If you'd like to learn how you can become a sponsor, you can go to our website, veracityhill.com, and there are different sponsorship levels. We'd love to get your support for the continuing ministry of Veracity Hill. Even once we take our indefinite hiatus, the work will continue on. Chris will be cutting clips. There are 200 episodes of material which we'll be looking to chop up and to put up on Facebook and YouTube. And Mark will continue doing work coming up with quotes from our guests throughout the years of the program. So we'd love to get your support. Go to veracityhill.com and begin supporting us on a monthly basis today. And if this podcast has been a blessing to you, please consider reviewing it for us on iTunes or the Google Play Store or our Facebook page as well. It's a great opportunity for people who are just stumbling across the program to learn what other people think about it. We'd love to get your 5-star review on those platforms. All right, now's the time of the show that we call... What's Behind Kurt? Chris, your 5 voices of harmonizing had a hiccup there, I think. Quite all right, though. All right, the segment of the show is called What's Behind Kurt. There's a green screen behind me, and presumably, again, as I've said week after week now, Chris has put up the Veracity Hill banner. Maybe he's put something else up. I don't know. All I see is green. And so now I have the opportunity. I've got 3 minutes, which I need to get my phone out here. Here it is. And set 3 minutes on the game clock for myself. I have 15 questions that I'm able to ask. It's like 20 questions, but we don't call it 20 questions. We call it What's Behind Kurt because that's more fun. All right, so presumably, Chris, you've put up an image behind me now. Magically.
Okay.
The
power of technology.
Yes, and I've got to guess what it is. So, if you're ready.
I'm ready.
Okay, I'm going to start the clock.
Here we go.
Is it a person?
No.
Is it a place?
No.
Oh, boy. Is it an object?
Yes.
This is the hardest category. Okay, let's see here. Is it something people can buy?
Yes.
Okay. Is it... So it's not like the coronavirus. People don't buy the coronavirus. That's an object, right?
Sure.
Okay, is this something they buy, people can buy at a grocery store?
No.
Okay. Is it something you can buy at Walmart?
No.
Oh man, I'm gonna get stumped here. Second to last episode, and I'm gonna lose this segment. Okay. How many questions have I asked?
You've used 6.
Okay.
6 questions.
I've already used quite a bit of my time. An object, man. People can buy it, but you say that hesitantly. Oh gosh, I'm gonna struggle with this one. Is it something I own? Either personally or here at the Defenders Media office?
I'm going to gander no.
Is this in the entertainment sector?
Yes.
Wow.
I feel bad for you on this one. I think you've... Well, I won't say anything.
Did I nerf a question?
You might have.
Oh boy. I'm struggling. Even in my taxonomy, typically I'm good. I work my way up and down, and this one's a hard one. An object that you maybe buy but don't buy.
I mean,
I've got 1 minute.
The answer was correct that I gave.
Yeah.
It can be bought.
But not really the entertainment industry. Do you buy this at a sporting goods store?
No.
Is it a... See, I don't even know where to start. If you can't get it at Walmart, where can you get it? Can you buy this online?
Oh, yes.
How many questions do I have left?
You have 5 questions
With 30
left.
seconds. Is it a tech item?
No.
Is it a movie ticket?
Nope.
Is it... oh my gosh. 15 seconds, 3 questions. I don't even know where to go in this direction. Is it a movie?
No.
Yeah, 3 seconds. I'm out of time. I lost again. Lost last week, lost this week. What a shame.
Man.
What is the object, Chris?
The object, Kurt, is the Master Sword from the Legend of Zelda series.
Oh my gosh, it's the Master Sword.
Yeah, typically with your other categories you ask, is this blank fictitious?
Yeah. The object, that's a hard one to do.
And it can be bought. If you go to...
It was a fictional object.
Yeah, usually game or card shops or board game shops will have lots of replicas of this in their wares at malls.
This one was a hard one, I'll admit.
Yeah.
I struggled. Last week I got it wrong, but I felt like my taxonomy work was good.
Yeah, it was.
This week, not so much. Okay, well, that's what's behind Kurt. Let's get back to our guest today. He's Michael Bird, and he is the academic dean and lecturer in theology and New Testament at Ridley College in Melbourne, Australia. He comes to us from the future. And Mike, I did not tell you about this next segment of the show. We call Rapid Questions, and this segment's for you, and it's 60 seconds. I'm going to ask questions totally unrelated to our topic of conversation. I think you're going to do stellar at this segment. Sometimes scholars struggle, but your interest in pop culture, I think, is going to be just fine. So if you're ready, I will start the game clock, and I'll ask my first question.
Okay.
Okay, here we go. What's your favorite movie?
Schindler's List.
Morning person or night owl?
Night owl.
What's your number one phobia?
Fear of coffee.
Do you have a favorite board game?
Oh, that would be what's it called? Axis and Allies.
What's your favorite snack item?
That would be yogurt, almonds, and blueberries.
Okay, your favorite season?
Winter.
Marvel or DC?
Marvel.
One item you need on a deserted island?
That would be a very, very powerful radio.
Who would you like to narrate your life?
Oh, that'd be pretty good. Probably James Earl Jones.
Pick a fictional character you'd like to meet.
Batman.
Okay, very nice. Batman. You want to meet Batman? Do you want to meet him as Batman or Bruce Wayne?
I could be either. Either could be good, to meet him. But I think Batman would be pretty cool. Actually, come to think of it, I'd change my answer to Spider-Man. I think I'd rather see Spider-Man.
This is fascinating. The last, so this makes 3 episodes in a row. Our guest, so let's see, I didn't ask him his favorite superhero, but that was the question, right, Chris? I asked the previous 2 guys, and they said Spider-Man. So that's sort of 3. I mean, that's a different question, but sort of same answer. Spider-Man, what's up with all the interest in Spider? You know what? I think it's because there hasn't been another Spider-Man reboot recently.
Well, we seem to have one once a decade we get a Spider-Man reboot now, so
yeah,
it's not too bad. I remember Spider-Man from the 1970s cartoons. That's it's something of my age. So that's when the theme song Spider-Man.
Yes, absolutely.
That's when that was
a spider can spins a web anytime. Okay, so I'll stop.
Yeah, you got to listen to the version by Michael Bublé. It is pretty. He sings it. It's pretty awesome. But that's and there was like an early movie of that back in about 1980 or something. But yeah, that was really cool. That was really cool back in the day. So yeah, that still sticks with me as a nice childhood memory.
Now you said your number one phobia was
coffee.
Coffee, like the drink?
Yes.
So what's in the mug right now?
That's tea.
I think you just gained Chris's friendship here, my tech producer. He's a big tea drinker.
Actually, for me, it's not so much as a phobia of coffee, is more of a intense hatred thereof. I cannot stand the stuff.
So here's a real question for you, okay? Why does the water spin the other way in the loo, What's the explanation there?
That's because we have a thing called the northern and southern hemisphere. And the gravity, I think it's the gravity just pulls in a slightly different direction from north-south.
Yeah. And your Christmas, there's no snow at Christmas time, is there?
Americans tell me Christmas in Australia feels like 4th of July. Because that's when we put on our pair of thongs and go down and have a barbecue.
I'm sorry, your pair of what?
You put on a pair of thongs, or as you call them, flip-flops.
Oh, flip-flops, yeah, or sandals, yeah. Okay. I think, Chris, is this our first Australian guest? I think it might be.
It might be, yeah.
So, yeah, I think I'm having maybe too much fun here. Okay, getting back to the topic of conversation, we're looking at the New Testament in its world, the new book co-authored by N.T. Wright and Michael F. Bird. And those of you maybe have seen this little post-it note here I have. There's an interesting image here, Mike. Jesus Christ Superstar, the musical. How does that make it into a book on New Testament studies?
Well, it's very relevant. Jesus Christ Superstar was a musical that splashed onto the scene in the late 60s and early 70s, was a major cultural event. And even now, no matter how secular Australia is, whenever Jesus Christ Superstar is put on, it sells to, it plays to sell out crowds. So the story is still very good. The music, I think, is very good. It portrays a very real Jesus. It's a little bit sensational, was Mary Magdalene secretly in love with Jesus, that sort of a thing. But it's a terrific show. And if you want to talk about the reception of Jesus, then in our modern era, it's something you certainly can't forget.
Yes, and you also have a way of just mixing in pop culture references as you're able to, and it's one of the things I appreciate about your style. If I can, let's move the discussion to Paul. Talking about Paul, he is in Protestant theological discussions. He is one of the most debated authors in the sense that, as Peter says, he writes difficult things to understand. So how is it that the way you approach Paul is going to be different than what maybe we could call traditional Protestant understanding?
Well, I think, the way we do Paul is pretty much in three stages. First of all, we give a outline of his life. So, which is, a bit of a précis or a summary of Tom Wright's book, Paul, a biography. So we've got like a good summary of Paul's career, everything from his conversion roughly to his martyrdom and all the debates therein about the chronology. Then we give a brief outline of Paul's theology, how Paul reworks monotheism, Paul's idea of things like covenant and the renewed people of God, the major sort of, bastions of his thought, and then we kind of go through each book. I guess one of the main things that we talk about is how Paul is a very Jewish thinker. Okay, Paul isn't concerned with the separation of law and gospel. He's not concerned with kind of hashtag slave lives matter or anything like that. So we've got to be concerned not to project our own agendas and interests onto him. But Paul is trying to do two things: rework the Jewish worldview around Jesus and the Spirit, and then he's also trying to negotiate his way through the Greco-Roman world as the apostle to the Gentiles, that is, to the non-Jews. Going on my own sort of interest here, I've often described Paul as an anomalous Jew because he's thoroughly Jewish. Even his messianism, his view of the church as a kind of a type of renewed Israel, I think is a very Jewish way of conceiving of God's people. But he does say things that will occasionally grate against his fellow contemporaries. For example, when he says things like the Torah is now part of the problem rather than part of the solution. It's, Torah, sin, death are this unholy triumvirate. And the Torah is good and holy, but it's been used as a tool of death and corruption. I mean, this is not something most Jews were generally talking about. So Paul is both affirming very big key fixtures in the Jewish worldview, reworking them around Jesus, but because of his really intense convictions about Christ and other things, he's also saying things that are really grating against some of his Jewish compatriots, which is why he gets himself flogged, kicked out of the synagogue so many times.
So you've got a different take on tulip. As my long-term listeners will know, I am not a Calvinist tulip. I'm not Calvinist by the least. But I certainly don't accept the tulip as the English acronym shows it. You've got a different version of tulip, though, don't you? And you've got a couple different versions last I saw there.
Yes, okay. Well, first of all, Kurt, let me put you at ease, man. You've got to change your bad vibe about Calvinists, man. Calvinists, let me put my audio back in. Calvinists are not people who are worried that somewhere, somehow, someone is smiling. Okay, so get that image out of your head. Okay, let me explain Calvinism to you. People suck. They suck in sin. They are suckiness unto death. And the God who is rich and mercy saves him before they've even taken any moves towards him. So it's about the initiative of divine mercy and grace. That's Calvinism. Everything else is commentary, if you ask me.
So the way you described it there, I mean, God has taken the initiative with the work of Jesus' life, ministry, death, and resurrection. So, I mean, maybe how it's parsed out.
Well, also let me put this to you. The doctrine of predestination, the primary purpose of that doctrine is not to say who's in and who's out. The primary purpose of the doctrine of predestination is to provide assurance to believers. If God has saved you, then that's what he's always intended to do, and he's always going to see it through. So the purpose of predestination is actually pastoral assurance. I know this is a little bit of a red herring to what we're doing here.
No, quite all right. I'm a big corporate election advocate, so the way you define predestination is fine and dandy with me. It's just a matter of who's going to show up on the boat before it goes on the cruise.
Well, that's true. That's true. So what was the original question again?
Your alternative views of Tulip in light of Paul as a Jewish thinker. Yeah.
Yeah, so I just heard Calvinism. And,
you got triggered a little?
I was a little bit triggered. Oh, I'm more Calvinist bashing. Anabaptist. Probably never read Calvin. Mumble. There is the kind of, the tulip of Reformed theology, which I would say is not really the summary of Reformed theology. It's more of the theology of Dort, one particular Reformed council.
Yeah, that's fair, yeah.
So we did come up with a kind of tulip of different perspectives on Paul. And one was for the apocalyptic Paul, and the other one was for the Paul within Judaism. So there's a couple of different schools of Paul. There's like the new perspective on Paul, there's the traditional Paul, but there's also a thing called Paul within Judaism and the apocalyptic Paul, which I'm sure listeners of your program would be familiar with. So we kind of came up with a way to describe the Paul within Judaism and the apocalyptic Paul with their own kind of tulip. Now, I'm not too sure whether the advocates of those respective schools will be particularly happy with my 5-point breakdown. But this is just kind of a memory aid that students could use to help them understand the other schools of Pauline thought beyond the traditional, beyond the new perspective.
Yeah, very nice. And I know you do credit Schreiner, I think, with some help on modifying or coming up with one of the creative ways.
Yes, it's Schreiner the Younger, Patrick Schreiner. I think I put this on Twitter or something. How does this sound like the apocalyptic Paul or the Paul within Judaism? And he gave me, I think, a slightly good variation on that, which would really help. But yeah, just all good theology should be reducible to 5 points, summarized with the acronym TULIP. I mean, if you can't tulip it, is it really even a theology?
Yes, and then of course we should read just systematically into that system, and every verse in the whole Bible has to fit it within there, as you know.
Yes. Well, as Homer Simpson says, don't mess with the system. The system is good.
Okay, so we've got just a few more minutes here. Let me ask you about the making of the New Testament, with regard to textual criticism and the canon. Why did you perceive that was a valuable aspect to the overall project?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people seem to think that the Bible almost like floated down from heaven wrapped in leather, written in King James English, the words of Jesus in red, complete with Bible verses, references, and Schofield footnotes, or something along the lines, or whatever their favorite notes are. But you've got to ask the question, okay, I'm holding a Bible in my hand, or I'm reading a Bible on my phone. Where on earth did this thing come from? And this is a question I love asking my Protestant students. How do you know which book should be in the Bible? because the Bible doesn't tell you which book should be in there. So how do you know which book should be in the Bible? And that for them kind of creeps them out, because sooner or later they've got to say a church council decided it. And if you're a kind of uber Protestant, that really weirds you out, that type of a thing. So we kind of go through, the basic question of how we got the Bible. And that means looking at the text, talking about, what are those early manuscripts? And what do we do when we got, say, two manuscripts of Revelation, but they've got slightly different wording at one point? How do we decide which one is more likely to be the original or more likely? So what's the criteria for doing that? And then, of course, we talk about the canon. Why do we have Romans in our canon, but we don't have the Didache? We don't have the Gospel of Thomas. So why is that? Or was this canon put together by a bunch of or by a sherry of bishops at the behest of Constantine to create a very narrow and doctrinaire version of the faith that could be used to stamp out women and all sorts of minorities and ethnic diversities?
That sounds like a great plot for a fictional book right there.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I hate Dan Brown books a lot, but what I really hate the most is I never wrote them. Because I'd be right now sitting on my own little island with my own little one-man seminary, inviting a few people to come from a monastic retreat and talk theology and exegesis while we have pina coladas on the beach, while our monkey butlers come and bring us snacks or something like that.
Yeah, while sipping tea, but no coffee.
No coffee. There'll be no Kahlua, no tiramisu on the island. It will be all coffee will be shot on site.
Hilarious. Okay, final question for you. This is a thick textbook, right? It's academic work. You do all sorts of various scholarship, but the intention and hope for this book is not just to fill people's minds with facts and data. It's to bring about a flourishing life as a disciple of Christ. Tell me more about why you wanted that to be sort of your end goal and an emphasis in this work.
Yeah, I think what we want to give people is, again, let's say, not the list of life hacks that you can get from Paul or Hebrews. I mean, we actually finish every chapter with something about thinking through application. So we are concerned with application, but it's not a list of life hacks. It's about having a mind, a worldview, and a set of habits that is shaped by the New Testament vision. And the New Testament vision is about devotion to Jesus and life in the Spirit, okay? And that God was in Christ reconciling the world to himself, that type of a thing. Now, if you have a worldview shaped like that, then you're going to be equipped to deal with things better, like COVID-19. I mean, how do we think Christianly? How do we act messianically? How do we keep in step with the Spirit? How do we give glory to the Father during COVID-19? There is no Bible verse you can go to for that, okay? So you've simply got to allow the Spirit to work in your scripture-soaked mind to lead you through it. Or another question, how do we be missional in an increasingly secular and pluralistic context? Again, there's no Bible, there's no secularism in the ancient world, so you can't find the kind of the Uber Eats answer. You can't just 3 taps on your phone and then the answer comes to you. It's got to require the hard work of reflection, application, thinking through things, going through the whole everything from what would Jesus do to what does it mean to live wisely before the world. And if we're going to be able to meet the challenges of the future, then we've got to get into the texts and the story of the Christian scriptures, which is, not just the New Testament, also the Old Testament as well. That is what's going to enable the church to survive and indeed thrive when we have all these different crises or problems or challenges thrown up in our way. It's going to be through not the instant McNuggets, but the long, slow work of thinking scripturally about complex problems that Scripture does not give us an easy answer to.
Very nice. Good. Dr. Michael F. Bird, thank you so much for your ongoing ministry of scholarship. I do view it as a ministry that many people with bright minds and late nights or early mornings, typically it's one of the other people, they wake up early and do their scholarship then, or me, I'm a night owl, so it's from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. that the world goes to sleep and I can read and focus and do my writing. So thank you so much for the work and for getting out this book here, The New Testament in Its World, co-authored with the Tom Wright, put out by Zondervan and SBCK. We'll be sure to put a link to the book, along with some other additional things like the little workbook here, which is great. And this, when you're talking about sort of the discipleship aspect, the workbook has great questions, engaging people to think critically about their life and how they've understood the text, and pushes them a little further to engage with the material. And also we've got the 37 lectures. You had the chance to go to the Holy Land and beyond. I'm sure that was a blast, huh?
Oh, that was a blast. That was a blast. Tom makes a great tour guide. I mean, if his whole biblical studies thing doesn't work out for him, he could definitely work as a tour guide in Israel.
Yeah.
I was going to say, Kurt, on the workbook, could you do me a favor? Could you go to the chapter on textual criticism and canon and look at one of the final questions? It's about what is the NA28, what is the ECM, and tell us what the multiple choice options are.
Okay, here we are. What are the ECM, NA, USB, SBL, GNT, and THGNT all types of? A. Discount codes for Christian dating websites. B. Names of ancient manuscripts. C. Abbreviations for English Bible translations. And D. Abbreviations for critical editions of the Greek New Testament. I think the answer to that one is A, discount codes for Christian dating websites.
Yeah. Yeah, well, give that a go at Christian Mingle. Let me know how it goes. Actually, Kurt, you're married, so you should definitely not be doing that.
That's right. That's right.
Or you'll get in big trouble.
I would, yes.
Kurt, I wish you every success with the end of Veracity Hill and your future ventures, and thank you to you and all your listeners for your time.
Thank you, Mike. Hey, will I have the opportunity to maybe see you in Rhode Island or Boston this autumn, perhaps?
Well, we'll have to see how much of the disease-ridden world is left come November. Otherwise you may see me the next time I come in America. Maybe I'll volunteer as tribute, and you'll see me in the latest version of the Hunger Games.
That's called The Bachelor here, okay? The Bachelor or Bachelorette.
Oh, well, I don't want to be on that show anytime soon.
Hilarious. God bless you, Mike. We'll be in touch.
You too, Kurt. Take care, man.
Well, that does it for the show today. I'm grateful for the continued support that we have had through our patrons, folks that just chip in a few bucks each month, $5, $10, or $20. We'd love to get your support for the ongoing ministry of Veracity Hill. I'm also grateful for the partnerships that we have with our sponsors. They are Defenders Media, Consult Kevin, The Sky Floor, Rethinking Hell, the Illinois Family Institute, and Fox Restoration. I want to thank our technical producer, Chris, for all the fine work that he does week in and week out here, and to our communications associate, Mark, for the scheduling and announcements that he gets out for the program. I want to thank our guest, Dr. Michael Bird, for all the fine work that he does for his writing style, his engaging, accessible writing level, and yet scholarly research and attention and wisdom as well. So thank you for him and his ministry work. Last and certainly not least, I want to thank you for listening in and for striving for truth on faith, politics, and society.
You've been listening to Veracity Hill, striving for truth on faith, politics, and society. This is a listener-supported program. For more resources, including past shows, visit veracityhill.com.